From sentient mushrooms to world-weary paladins to the creepiest houses you'll ever encounter, T. Kingfisher is one of my favourite authors and has been an auto-buy for a number of years now. She writes everything from fairy tale retellings to dark fantasy into genuinely skin-crawling horror. So with such a rich backlog of books to pick from, where should you start? For the first time, I am going to go through all of the T. Kingfisher books I have read in publication order and decide where I would put them on a ranking scale. We're going to find out which ones I think are utter must-read masterpieces and which ones just fell by the wayside. I really want to thank Faye at Books and Chocoholic. She was the one that gave me the idea to film this video by doing her own ranking of her currently read Kingfisher books. As we work our way, it's kind of been an unofficial read along that's just snowballed through as many Kingfisher books as we can in her Discord. So we start out back in 2013 with 9 Goblins. This is the first book that gets published under the T. Kingfisher pen name, and it's really more of a novella than a full-length novel. Honestly, I don't remember that much about this one. It didn't really stick in my mind, and I think if I had read this as my first Kingfisher, I don't know if I would have stuck around. It very much does what it says in the tin. We're following a troop of goblins, but I do think you can see some of the things that Kingfisher does in later books that we'll come to love in their infancy here. We have the idea that goblins aren't exactly what their propaganda says they are, which I think comes through again later in the gnolls we see in the World of the White Rat series. In all honesty though, I don't think I can rate this one any higher than a D. Then we have The Seventh Bride. This was what I would consider like my first T. Kingfisher batch. There were 3 books that I read all at the same time. They were my introduction to her as an author. And of the 3, I think this was the last one I read and the one that I was most kind of convinced that this was an author I wanted to follow. The Seventh Bride is a combination retelling of Bluebeard and The Robber Bride. It does still have quite a juvenile feel to it. I think Kingfisher is still in this one getting used to writing for older readers, for adults, but it did have some genuinely creepy moments and I remember having a good time with it. I'm going to put this one up in the B tier for now. Then we have Bryony and Rosie's, again one of those first 3. This actually might have been the very first Kingfisher I read because it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling and that's something I am always here for. I actually read this while I was in Disney World because I wanted some kind of Disney has adapted them type fairy tales and I had such a good time with it. I love Beauty and the Beast, but I also really like the way that T. Kingfisher gave us Bryony as a character. She's very much, I think, the original mould for so many of the Kingfisher characters we see now. She's a little bit quirky, a little bit of an outcast. She has a really focused special interest. In this, it's gardening. And she's maybe not as polished as some protagonists we would get from other writers. I'm not entirely certain how well this would hold up to rereading now. I must have read this one about 8 years ago, but I do still have a fond spot for it and I would maybe want to try and reread it at some point. So while I don't think it lives up to some of the more recent books, and I'm going to put it in the same category as The Seventh Bride, I think I would put it closer to the beginning of the B line, ahead of The Seventh Bride. Then we have Castle Hangnail. This one is actually written under the Ursula Vernon pen name rather than Kingfisher, but I think this one fits Kingfisher far more than the books that I've seen and haven't read published as Ursula Vernon. It is middle grade, but it has that fantasy, slightly spooky vibe, just in a more younger reader appropriate way. In this, we are following Molly, again that slightly Kingfishery protagonist. She turns up on the doorstep of the recently vacated Castle Hangnail to fill the vacancy for a wicked witch. The castle minions desperately need some kind of evil ruler, or the board of magic is going to decommission the castle, so they assist Molly in projecting as fierce and wicked a reputation as she can. It's fun, it's quirky, it's a little bit Halloweeny and spooky, and it's a really nice version of a T. Kingfisher story for middle grade. It's another one I would like to reread at some point, and again I think I'm going to put it on that B category, just in front of Bryony and Rosie's. Back to the first 3 Kingfishers I read. This one is The Raven and the Reindeer. It is a Snow Queen retelling. It has a sapphic romance. At the time, it was really hard to find sapphic stories I was interested in, and I have fond feelings for this one, but I don't know that I remember much about the plot, if I'm brutally honest. So I really don't think I can rate it in the B category, and I'm going to put it in C. Then we come to the first book in what has become the World of the White Rat universe. This is The Clockwork Boys. Also going to talk about the sequel because it is a duology with The Wonder Engine. I read them both together, I read them back to back at the same time, and in my head they're kind of one story. They were enjoyable, but they weren't anything particularly special in my mind. I enjoyed them more so, I think, because I saw things that Kingfisher comes back to in later books in the series. And I don't know whether now I might reread them and find even more, especially with Daggerbound coming out soon. So they might end up on a reread shelf or a reread TBR at some point. But for now, I think I'm going to have to put them in the C ranking. Honestly, maybe just underneath The Raven and the Reindeer. In these we have a ragtag group of misfit adventurers looking to unravel the secret of the Clockwork Boys and the Wonder Engines, which are mechanical monster soldiers in a neighbouring city. We hear some of this about Wonder Workers and Wonder Engines and the Clock Towers in the later books, but I just didn't feel like it was as cohesive a concept in these as it became later. I don't know what order I'd put the 2 books in, so I'm just going to go Clockwork Boys and the Wonder Engines. And those books were followed up by one of my favourite books of all time, Sword Heart. This for years has been essentially a standalone book in this World of the White Rat series that Kingfisher apparently struggled to write the sequel for. It's coming out very, very soon, or might even be out already depending on when I post this. But Daggerbound has been a real labour of love, I think. And in the meantime, to keep her hand in with the world, to explore it further, she wrote the first 4 Saints of Steel books. Sword Heart though remains my favourite. In it we follow Hala, who is a middle-aged widow. She has been living with her wealthy uncle and looking after him, and he has died. Uncle Silas's relatives want to keep his wealth in the family, and they decide that Hala should be remarried to clammy-handed cousin Alvar. Hala does not want this marriage at all, and as she sees it, the only way out is to take the ancient sword that has been on the wall for decades and get out of the marriage. When she unsheathes the sword though, a warrior flashes into being in the room. Sarkis has been trapped in the sword for centuries. He is a warrior and he is magically bound to serve the wielder of the blade. The 2 go off on a road trip to the city of Anukit to get the help of the White Rat priests and lawyers to try and smooth over Hala's inheritance and family problems. We get so many interesting things in this book that sets up this world. We get to see gnolls, we get to see the Hanged Mother, the different types of paladins, some characters that will make an appearance in the next series. And overall, I just adore Hala as a character. I love her with Sarkis. I love the banter between the 2 of them. This one, unquestioningly, is going right at the top of the S tier. Then we have Minor Mage. This is another very short novella. It's young adult / middle grade, somewhere in that window. And honestly, I don't remember much about it. We have a young wizard who is, as the title says, a very minor mage. He doesn't have much magic. He has, I think, a pet armadillo, and he has to, save his town. I remember thinking it was okay, but nothing special. So I think I'm going to put it in the D category alongside Nine Goblins. Then we jump into that Saints of Steel series that follows Swordheart. The first one is Paladin's Grace. In this we are following a group of holy knights, paladins, specifically the 7 remaining paladins of a god who has died, leaving the paladins prone to berserker rage and utterly filled with delicious trauma. Each of the book picks a paladin and follows their romantic journey. At the same time, we do have some bigger political stories happening, some murder mysteries, but the chemistry in each of the pairings in this series is just delicious. Paladin's Grace isn't my favourite in the ones I've read, but I do adore it, so I think I'm going to put it in A. Then we have another, I think it's low YA / middle grade, A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. This is the book that I really remember sort of Kingfisher hitting it big with. It's the one that I remember her really getting more hype from, where her other books that I had read up to that point were more self-published sleepers. In this one we are following 14-year-old Mona. She has, much like in Minor Mage, a kind of small amount of specific magic. Her power is to do with raising sourdough, and when she stumbles upon a body, she gets involved in assassinations that are happening across the city. When all of the other wizards disappear, Mona and her sourdough magic have to step up to the plate. Then we have The Hollow Places. This is the first book I'd read in what I would think of as T. Kingfisher's horror-y books. I know she writes sometimes dark fantasy. It's a very blurry line through her fairy tale fantasy, dark fantasy horror. But The Hollow Places is the one that I feel is her true horror book, the first one that I read. This is following a recently divorced, down on her luck protagonist who moves into her uncle's museum of curiosities. In amongst all the taxidermy, she finds a hole in a wall, and inside that wall she finds a room with proportions that simply can't exist. When she and the local barista go through the room, up the stairs, they find themselves in a completely brand new world. It's very like the world between the worlds in Narnia, with lots of menacingly sentient trees and eerie, creepy pools of water. There's lots of body horror in this. There's a kind of alternate worlds angle going on. Genuinely, this has some chilling scenes and I love it. It can't quite compete with Swordheart, but it is going to go up in that S tier category. We come back to the Paladin's world for book 2 with Paladin's Strength. We are now following the Paladin leader, Istvan, as he continues the investigation that began in the first book and meets Clara, a nun with a shape-shifting ability. I love a good road trip book. This one, when I first read it, was probably my least favourite of the 3, but it has, on my recent reread, crept up. It was a sneak attacker, and I actually think now of those first 3 Paladin books, because I still do need to read the 4th one, but rereading these 3, I think Paladin's Strength has come up, beating the other 2 out, and become my favourite of the series so far. It's only fair then that it goes in the A category with Paladin's Grace, but a little bit further forward. Immediately we are following that with Paladin's Hope. This one is more of a locked room, the Crystal Maze style challenge with a queer romance. When I first read the 3, this was my favourite, but as I said, I think Paladin's Strength has just sneaked out in front by a whisker. So Paladin's Hope is going to go on the A category with its fellow Paladin books sandwiched in the middle. Then we have Nettle and Bone, which isn't quite a novella, I don't think, but is a very short novel, and it's very much a original story that feels like it should be an old-fashioned fairy tale, but with a really dark and kind of gothic vibe to it. We're following a young princess who has been betrothed in marriage to an abusive, corrupt prince, and having seen the way that her sisters have been treated in such marriages, decides it is not for her and that she's going to kill the prince instead. She goes off on a quest, a very fairy tale style quest, having to find 3 magical items. She befriends a witch. I think there's some other quirky Kingfisher style animal helpers along the way, but I really love this one. I think it's a great gateway book into Kingfisher because it really straddles that fantasy horror blend that she does. I'm going to put it in the A category just after the Paladins books. And then after a run of really top tier books, we have my personal disappointment. What Moves the Dead is a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. We have sentient mushrooms, we have a non-binary soldier protagonist returning home to help a friend. I just did not like this book. I did not click with this book, and it's the only Kingfisher book I've read where I would say I actively disliked it. So it's gonna have to go in its own special rating down here on the X level. Then we have Illuminations. This is another middle grade book. In it we have a family who are kind of magical painters. Their illustrations come alive and are able to help their city in various ways, but the family have recently been kind of down on their luck. Rosa is the protagonist. She finds a box, opens the box, and releases a creature called the Scarling, which starts to destroy all the magical paintings that the family have produced for the city, and thus the city becomes endangered, and Rosa has to work to recapture the Starling and save the city. While this isn't a personal favourite of mine, because I don't tend to reach for middle grade that often, I did think it was really cute and really charming, so I think I would put it ahead of Minor Mage and Nine Goblins on the D tier. I'm not sure whether it would go before or after the Clockwork Boys. I think probably the Clockwork Boys duology has more appeal. It ties in with the Saints of Steel books. I think Illuminations probably belongs at the end of that C tier. This is the first one I've been unsure of, but I think I'm happy with that for now. Then we have A House with Good Bones. This is back to adult novels and it's very southern gothic. We have a protagonist who returns home to her mother and finds that something is deeply wrong in the house. I really thought this would be one that I would love, but it didn't click with me the way I wanted it to. And ultimately, I don't think of it as being that memorable. I think T. Kingfisher has done similar books, taking the various different tropes in this one have played out in other books in better ways, with more depth to it and more fleshed out tropes and themes. And this one just is a little bit of a washout for me. So it's going to go on the D category, but maybe ahead of Nine Goblins. Then we had Thornhedge, which was a little bit like an inverted Sleeping Beauty novella. We have Toadling, who has been raised by fairies. She is asked to put a curse on a castle, and then when a knight comes to break the curse, they go on an adventure together. I don't know whether it was just too short for me. I think one of the things I'm finding here is that I personally don't always adore Kingfisher's novellas, maybe. This one I think was really popular when it came out, but I just wasn't a huge fan. There was nothing majorly wrong with it, I just didn't love it, and at this point I had begun to expect to love Kingfisher books. I think that I would put it after A House with Good Bones, but before Nine Goblins. Then we are returning to form with A Sorceress Comes to Call. This is a retelling of The Goose Girl. We get some classic T. Kingfisher creepy ass horses. There's two protagonists. One is our young girl, she's the Goose Girl story, and we do get a evil villainous type mother character, and a slightly doddering appearing but very smart older woman as well. It's a fantastic book and I love this one. It maybe didn't hurt that I read this at an airport, so like I didn't have much else to distract me, but this was one of my favourite Kingfishers. I'm not sure whether I want to put it on the A or the S tier. If it goes on the S tier, it's going to go after Hollow Places, but if it goes on A, it's probably going to go before Paladin's Strength. I think I'm going to be generous, and I think I'm going to be generous. I do remember having such fun with it, and I think I'm going to we're going to go with A, but at the very, very top of A. Then we have Hemlock and Silver. This is blending the kind of dark fairy tale aspect that Kingfisher does with her older retellings. We get a Snow White story where our protagonist is again a very typical T. Kingfisher protagonist, very practical, very interested in herbs and gardening and healing. She is called by the king to protect his daughter after his wife dies, and there's a lot here with creepy mirrors, alternate kind of worlds through the glass. Again, a lot of those kind of core Kingfisher tropes. I read this one back in January. I really liked it. I thought there were some really good scenes. There's one scene in particular where the protagonist is lying in bed watching herself in the mirror, and I was listening to it in bed and no. It's a really good creepy moment, but in the book as a whole, I think looking back I was a little bit underwhelmed. So realistically, I think it belongs maybe on the C tier, but at the very top of the C tier. Then there is Snake Eater. This is another damaged, down her luck protagonist returns to family only to find creepy ass things are happening. In this one, it is her aunt. She goes to this very isolated, deserty town to reconnect, finds that her aunt has actually recently passed away, but that she has inherited her aunt's property. However, it also turns out that she seems to have unofficially inherited her aunt's bond or deal with a local minor god, Snake Eater, who is looking for her to take up her aunt's place as some kind of paramour. There was a lot here about religion, these kind of native folklore type faiths versus more modern organized Christianity. There was a lot about abusive relationships and gaslighting and the way that that can impact your perception of future non-romantic relationships. There's also Grandma Billy with a shotgun, the absolute GOAT character. This is another one I'm dithering on whether to go into S or A. I don't know whether... I loved what this book did, I really did. I liked that it had just a touch of creepy horror, but the social analysis was just so nicely done, the character work. I think it's gonna go just after A Sorceress Comes to Call. Honestly, these two, A Sorceress Comes to Call and Snake Eater, maybe they belong up in the S. I think I'm going to move A Sorceress Comes to Call up onto the S tier, which moves Snake Eater to the very front of the A tier. I think that feels fair. And then the last one we are left with is Wolfworm. This is again, much more solidly horror. It's a historical. We have I'm not sure, she draws like insect illustrations. And she, again, is down her luck, ends up taking a position out of this very isolated house working for a really creepy man. And she starts to wonder about what has happened to his previous assistant, his wife. There were skin-crawling moments in this. They were vivid. It isn't, again, one of my personal favourites because of it's just not the subject matter that I love. It's done so well. I think it probably has to go in the B tier. If we're being really objective, like the best books, it probably goes at the front of the B tier ahead of Castle Hangnail. But since this is my tier rating and my opinion obviously matters, I think I'm going to bump it down just a little bit so it comes after A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. So those are my tier rankings for Tea Kingfisher as currently stands. I still have a few that I need to pick up. Most recently and most pressingly, I am hoping to read Daggerbound in the next couple of weeks. That's the direct sequel to Swordheart. I'm also planning on reading Paladin's Faith, which is the 4th in the Saints of Steel series, at some point this month or next month. And I would like to read, I think The Twisted Ones is along the lines of the Hollow Places type of horror. I think there are also a couple of books of short stories I've not read because I'm not a huge short story fan. And then she has a couple of books coming out next year, one of which I think is maybe a kind of murder mystery, and the other one is a Baldur's Gate tie-in. If you're a Kingfisher fan, let me know which of these books you would argue. Where would you have put things? Where would you have done things differently? If you're not a major Kingfisher fan but you've read one or two, let me know which ones you've read and which ones you are interested in. I might do something like this again, maybe in a year or two, once I've read more of the backlist and seen those new releases. Thank you for watching. This was a totally new thing for me. I've never done a tier ranking before, especially not a tier ranking video. So let me know if it worked. Let me know if it's something that's fun to watch, and if there are other kind of ranking things that you'd be interested in hearing me blabble on about. Thanks for watching, and I hope that I'm going to see you in future videos. Goodbye.